Welcome, friends, brothers, and sisters, to our channel, Myths and Legends. Myths and Legends, I hope to create a community that has its identity found stories. The stories that last through the ages. The ones that are retold again and again and again. On this channel, we will cover the structures, symbols, and archetypes of each story. I will extract the most meaningful pattern that I can from each one. Each tale and each myth has an infinite amount of interpretations, of possible interpretations. But because of our own worldview as an individual and the way the world interacts with us and the context of each story, there should be a hierarchy of interpretations for each story. Some interpretations are better than others based on those restraints. So I will try to lay out the most meaningful interpretation of each story that I can. One that has a positive utility to it. But I'm going to need your help to do that. And that's where my desire for a community for this channel comes from. So I hope that this will become a great discussion for us all. One where we're continually learning and changing, and hopefully changing in a good way, or growing our perspective of the world and of these tales that have been left behind. But my videos will lack something inevitably, and we'll be able to uncover that together. I'm not going to be the definitive source of interpretation for anything, nor should I be. Like you, like us all, we come from a position of knowing almost nothing compared to the great well of what could be known. And so I take the humble position of knowing that I know almost nothing. I do still think it's going to be a useful conversation for us to have, to try to create a hierarchy of the best possible interpretations. So I hope to bring to the table a worthwhile examination of these stories. And so I guess the question could be, what makes me worthy? What makes me worthy of trying to extract the best possible meaning that we can here? Well, I come from a background of film and storytelling, and as an artist, I like to observe the patterns of human beings and the patterns of stories, and I like to couple them together. I'm also a lover of psychology and an eternal student of philosophy. And I'm going to link various sources below this video in the description to create a sort of reading list that will build over time. And it's not just going to be limited to the stories that we cover here, but it's also going to have anything that were sources of inspiration for me. I'll even put those voices that might be pinned at odds to another story, let's say, or another interpretation, because I think it's worthwhile to see all of the possible perspectives of something. It's also going to be useful to note that as we all grow, we change our minds about things. We begin to have different belief systems, or they alter in little ways here and there, and sometimes they alter in major ways. That's something that's happened to me, and I'm sure that it's happened to most people. And that's why I think it's worthwhile to look at all of the sources, even the ones that you feel the gut reaction to reject. If you feel a gut reaction to reject it, then maybe you should actually look at it. If you see something coming from a, let's say, enemy ideology, then definitely look at it, because you're going to want to know how it's structured. So let's take this humble path together, with all of its contradictions and mental struggles that we'll go through. And all of that is going to be welcome here, as it can help persuade our flow towards growth and an ascension, which will be important to our first story and many to follow, the idea of ascending. One great motivator that led me to create this channel was the discovery of my lack of knowledge, and finally being able to detect that my container, let's say, of wisdom was virtually empty and unformed. I didn't have anyone telling me how to interpret certain stories. See, in school, when they would have you do something like write a book report, they didn't exactly tell you how you should break down those structures. That was something I learned later in life. Thankfully, I found that it was intuitive once I started seeing those patterns. Being only 29 and still, relatively young, there was a point in my early 20s where I realized that I didn't know everything. And that was a humbling point in my life, because I was, like the typical teenager, nihilistic, at least in a way, atheist, at least I tried to convince people that I was, and ahistorical. And there I sat, believing that I knew everything about the world, and that my analytic mind was the best mind to interpret the things around me without any help from any outside sources. So like many of you have probably gone through, when you're in this state of ignorance, you end up adopting or inheriting a false vision of the world, using terms incorrectly, using language incorrectly. So it was my false interpretation of the material that made it difficult to see what was on the fringe and what was beyond. And you want to have a sense of those things if you're going to interpret the world correctly. So to move forward, we're going to have to clarify some terms that have become diluted over time and are the victims of this postmodern philosophy, or an ideology. I will be using this book as my source for all of my stories and terms and definitions. Myth. This is important to us. So, myth, as defined, usually a traditional story of ostensibility historical events that serves to unfold part of the worldview of a people or explain a practice, belief, or natural phenomena. My own take on this, and I'm not alone in this, is that a myth is usually produced by an artist. An artist in the shamanistic tradition of society, to create a long-lasting myth, they need to have a good understanding of the patterns of the world, the patterns of humanity, and be good observers of the world. So for the myth to be long-lasting, they have to explain patterns that go well beyond their times. So this definition is a little bit loose, I would say, as it says it serves to unfold a part of the world or a view of a people. Well, a good myth tells the truth of all people, something that remains true forever about humanity. And that's why I see myths as meta-truths, and as such, in many ways, are more true than nonfiction. They're livable in an unavoidable way. See, right now, you're living out a myth, and you should know myths so that you know what myth that you're playing out in your life. As a human, it is almost impossible to not see time as a cosmic narrative, a story. It is an eternal mechanism for humanity, and an unavoidable one for us to live with. Even the nihilist uses meaning and story to describe their past, their ancestral past, and their hopes for others and their own future. A mistake that we've been making in Western civilization is turning our backs on myths, because we've diluted the meaning of myth. We've diluted it down to its least foundational definition, to mean unfounded or false notions, imaginary beings and places. We have turned them into fairy tales from children's books with simple moral lessons, most of which go far beyond morality to begin with. So we're going to definitely cover fairy tales here and show you why it's not just about these simple moral lessons. Sometimes it's not even about morality. In doing so, that's left a void, turning our backs and leaving myths. So what fills that void? the cold space of science, which doesn't even inhabit the story or story structure. It doesn't have turning points, it doesn't have a climax, it doesn't have a denouement, it doesn't have a purposeful narrative to follow by example. So we are meaning-making creatures. Even the atheist or the nihilist and all the other postmodern ideologies use meaning to explain meaninglessness. And they get stuck in these parasitic cycles, these modes of being, such as heightened states of anxiety and depression, that continuously feed on them. Well, those have meaning. There wouldn't be pain if it didn't mean anything. You cannot avoid pain. The meaning that they give, it serves to be useless, or at least it is an inhibiting meaning. There's no good utility for it. It doesn't make your life better. It might begin as some kind of pride to win an argument, or to make people think that you're smart, or to try to fill in the gaps of a world that you don't understand, but it usually results in suffering. So it comes with few benefits, and it creates a life full of misery, as chaos always seems to break through to what is safe, making you safe no longer, because the boundary is fragile, and it's a boundary that surrounds us. These ideologies cannot protect you from the moments when your pillars and foundations crumble. We should desire to escape these cycles of foolishness, but in life, it's inevitable. We're going to be foolish. We're going to fall, and we're going to fall into chaos. So it's best that we listen to the lessons of these myths and legends and religious teachings, because they may strengthen us for our recovery. They might even help us so that we don't fall such a great distance. Just by knowing the term myth properly, we have a good start for finding where we can cultivate our wisdom, and that wisdom will help strengthen our lives. Another term that we often dilute is the word faith. As it is often used in modern times, they see it as a sort of belief in something that they have no proof of, and that's not exactly the right way to be thinking of this. It actually has its roots in words that are more akin to something like trust, like feed or fider. For theologians of the past, it's more of a sense of da'ath, from Hebrew word meaning intelligence, thinking, and knowledge. Da'at or da'ath is a perfected state of infinite sharing, so it's a reciprocal realization. That's what faith is. To know faith, you must know that there is a narrative, as we talked about before, and a course, a sort of course that you should follow, a proper mode of being. You must know your myths, understand the patterns of being, and the patterns around you. For what faith is a sense of trust that you're on the right course. And to know faith, you must know that you're in a sort of cosmic narrative. You have to see the patterns in your life and the patterns in the world around you. To have faith is to trust that you're on the right course. Another reason people have turned away from at least biblical teachings is because of their idea of faith and their idea of myth, making it akin to something like lies or believing in primitive things. And people are becoming intelligent, but they're growing in foolishness. And that brings us to sin, another word that we've diluted. So sin doesn't mean to just do things that are immoral or do wrong things or things that are against some kind of law that is laid down by a god. If you're self-deluded and believe that you're living the best version of yourself, but you're not, then you would be in what is called a sin. And the Greeks translated the word sin. They used the word mersha, and that means to miss the mark. It's an archery term. So to get your arrow to follow the correct path and hit the bullseye of the target, you have to sort of aim above and not look directly at that bullseye, or else you'll miss. So you have to have a kind of faith to know that your arrow is going to hit the target. So sinning in life is going along on that path and missing those turning points. If you choose wrong during these turning points, you'll probably descend from the mountain. Another term that we have to clarify, at least for our first video, is prophet. We see prophecy as some kind of mystical way to tell the future, and a prophet as some kind of wizard, but that's not exactly right, at least not for our purposes. A prophet is A prophet is somebody who can diagnose you in the now. See, they know the patterns of life, and they know the patterns of the world, and they can tell you about where you're going to end up based on following those patterns. They can do it for an individual, and they can do it for a whole society. When they do it for a whole society, that's what elevates them to the term prophet. Some great storytellers have been seen as akin to the prophet, but if you find the patterns within the story that they've written, you too can extract the potential for a certain outcome of the future. So understanding your myths and your legends has some grip on the real world. The first story that I'll be doing on this channel will be Exodus from the Old Testament. The reasons for that is because it has the most fundamental biblical grammar within it. And if we can find the patterns within that grammar, then you too will be able to understand all stories that follow in this channel and all stories within the Bible. Many attempt to mimic biblical grammar, but not many succeed. And though much of the population has turned their back on the Bible, they seem to go and seek out its structure in the masses. As the masses flock to the movie theaters to go watch their favorite superhero fight on the big silver screen, what you're seeing is a watered down and tame version of what you can find in the Bible. A hero who falls, who gains wisdom from the dissension, only to rise up and succeed again. To lead their people out of slavery, reborn, redemption, a story that shapes or defines our sense of self and place in the world. That is biblical narrative. No matter what my beliefs are, I'm not here to convert you. I'm not here to play the prophet. These aren't going to be definitive interpretations of these stories, just the best that I can get to. And if you think that you know of any other patterns or pieces that I could put into this, go ahead and comment down below and let me know. And then maybe we can revisit this together. I really hope to keep revisiting these stories again and again. I chose Exodus because it contains my favorite and most foundational story structures. It is the tale of how a man makes his ascension towards something more unified, toward a better mode of being, even just through the pursuit of it, not necessarily through its victory. It teaches us how to participate in this manner, giving it an endless amount of utility as a great story should. It shows us how to create our own story, as it has the foundations. Any myth, theology or not, can be related to Exodus. How to create the future, how to find meaning in the pursuit, and how to recognize our moments of decision. So I hope you join us here again on our channel, Myths and Legends.